men play a different role in seedling and small trees, in planting and maintaining homestead woodlots and plantation of public lands. And when we talk about READ, this famous thing that is being discussed in climate change, women's roles in reforestation, deforestation, and afforestation varies tremendously among men and women and from different cultures as well. Next. Also, a very interesting thing when we talk about adapting to climate change. Studies conducted by IUCN and various universities worldwide, we found out that female earnings from the sale of forest-related products is more likely to be spent on family needs, up to 90%, while those same earnings in the hands of the men tend to be spent only 50%. The rest, a big chunk, was spent in something that they call entertainment. And we can talk about what that is later. Next. Also, energy services are fundamental when we're talking about climate change and adapting and mitigating some of the effects. And there is a need to have a gender perspective in a lot of the technologies that are being developed, and especially the whole issue of biofuels. There is a new tendency, there is new approaches, and we have to understand not only biofuels, but bioenergy in general that needs to be understood. Next. Also, in the area of consumption, women and men roles in relation to consumption. God, I'm glad I'm good from my heart. God, yes. Believe me, I come from a country in which this means almost killing some of us. Okay, in some OECD countries, for example, women take over 80% of consumption decisions. So if we're talking about mitigating some of the effects, women's roles in consumption are fundamental. Next. Despite these facts, and this is a picture of what we saw in Bali. Those are the decision makers in the climate change arena. All white men, I'm gonna be nice, over 40. And despite, we have not had the opportunity to participate in decision-making processes in relation to climate change. Next. According to Minos Hemati's data, for example, in 2006, the percentage of female heads of delegations was 15.7. In 2007, it was only 12%. And this doesn't mean that that 12% of women have a gender perspective into the debate. So, next. So climate change and gender inequality are intrinsically linked. By exacerbating inequalities overall, climate change slow progress toward gender equality, but also gender inequalities can worsen the impacts of climate change, as I was saying earlier. Next. So very fast, you can see some of the direct effects of climate change, but you also have to understand how that is going to impact the human populations that we're talking, and that's where adaptation is fundamental. We know, for example, that there's going to be an increase in ocean temperatures, but what does this mean for the people, for example, in the Caribbean, in which the corals are bleaching? And in this case, for example, 46% of the tourism jobs in that area are in hands of the women. So what is this impact going to have on them? Or the increase in droughts and water shortages? Yes. For example, in India, rainfall shortages are more strongly associated with deaths among girls than boys. Next. An increase in extreme weather events. We found that this is not only affecting men and women in in developing countries. It is also affecting, for example, northern countries. More women than men died during the 2003 European heat wave. Or more women than men that work in the informal sector and in small enterprises do not have the assets to so easily recuperate some of the effects that they're having. Next. The decrease in food production. We heard today that women produce more than 50% of the food worldwide. In Africa, crop production is expected to drop from 20 to 50% if global changes move towards El Niño-like condition. What is this going to mean to the women, the 48% women in Burkina Faso, or the 70% of the women in Congo who are agriculturals? The loss of species. We're seeing that by 2050, there's going to be major changes in the species. There's going to be a loss of medicinal plants used by women, and already women, we had a congress last week in Barcelona, they are reporting that the characteristics of the plants are changing. They're becoming too strong or too weak. So when we talk about this traditional knowledge that they used to have, or that this traditional knowledge is not helping them to cope already with some of the changes that are happening. Next. The increase in epidemics, we heard from previous presentation, but we also have to remember that pregnant women are particularly susceptible to waterborne diseases. Anemia, often resulting from malaria, is responsible for a quarter of maternal mortalities. Next. But what can we do? And some ideas for moving forward, because this is not about coming and crying over spilled milk. We have to try to promote international policy action on climate change. At this moment, the negotiations toward a new post-2012 climate framework under the UNFCCC is happening. You must try to communicate with your delegations. Find out in your countries who is representing you in the climate change arena, who goes to the UNFCCC, and try to get involved, try to be part of the delegations, and try to ask for the position papers that your countries are taking. Next. There is a need to promote the national and local actions on climate change and gender. Especially less developed countries are already developing, or they have developed, what they call the national adaptation plans. Are you aware of them? You should. These are the plans through which the resources are going to be channeled for adaptation. WIDO has done an analysis of them, and I hope they're going to share that data later. But it's pitiful how gender issues have been incorporated. They're almost non-existent in some of them. Next. We have to encourage that gender-sensitive financial mechanisms and instruments consider gender criteria. Why? Because all these billions and billions of dollars, the new adaptation fund, the clean development mechanisms, none of them till today have any gender criteria for assigning those resources. Next. For example, the CDM has not been responsive to disadvantaged population or poor women, and you can see some of the data there. Next. We also need to promote the active participations of women organizations in the climate change debate. So far, we have been extremely lonely in going to the meetings and fighting for our things. We only get the famous side events. But in the main fora, in the main discussions, women are not even recognized as a major group. We don't have a concrete voice in these areas. Next. So we have to also, and we're going to hear later on, especially from Rebecca, the need to have an impact in the Secretariat of UNFCCC. There is a need that we demand that they developed a roadmap. The Convention on Biodiversity has already developed a gender strategy to ensure that equality is addressed, and we need to really put pressure in our parties so that they will request the Secretariat of the UNFCCC to develop a gender roadmap. And the reason for doing this is that we cannot afford to make the same mistakes. By neglecting the importance of gender, we are responsible for the death and imperishment of thousands of people. This is not about an issue only of politics. It's a matter of survival. Thank you very much.